Gladys Jennett had spent every New Year's Eve of her adult life alone, but tonight the silence felt sharper. Maybe it was because she'd spent the last 3 weeks watching the office empty out in waves of excitement. Marissa from HR going to the Hamptons with her fiancé, Chen from acquisitions flying to Miami for some celebrity-studded yacht party. Even the summer intern had a group reservation at that new speakeasy in Williamsburg. Or maybe it hurt more because for the first time in 2 years of working for Donald Trujillo, she'd caught herself imagining what it would be like to stand beside him at midnight, which was pathetic and delusional and the kind of thinking that got invisible women like her absolutely nowhere. She was his assistant. Hyper-efficient, practically office furniture, the kind of woman who could organize a hostile takeover by 9 a.m. and disappear into the background by 9:15. She managed his empire, fielded his calls, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and went home every night to a rent-stabilized studio in Queens where the only thing waiting for her was a dying jade plant she'd named Winston. Winston was struggling. He'd been struggling since October. But he refused to die completely, just kept existing in that gray zone between survival and surrender, which felt uncomfortably metaphorical. Tonight, Gladys had made peace with her situation. She'd bought wine that cost more than $15, downloaded a period drama she'd been meaning to watch, and changed into her softest pajamas, the ones with tiny penguins that she'd ordered for herself last Christmas because there was no one else buying her gifts. Her parents had died when she was 6, a house fire in Newark that the investigators said started with faulty wiring. No siblings. No grandparents who wanted the responsibility of a traumatized kid. She'd bounced through 4 foster homes before aging out at 18 with a full scholarship to CUNY and a bone-deep understanding that she was entirely on her own. She'd clawed her way through undergrad, worked 2 jobs while getting her MBA, and landed in Manhattan at 27 with a flawless resume and zero ability to connect with other human beings. 2 years in the city, and she still didn't have friends. Not real ones. Just colleagues who didn't invite her to happy hour because she was too quiet, too serious, too obviously uncomfortable anywhere that wasn't behind a desk. It wasn't that Gladys didn't want connection. She just didn't know how to build it. Didn't know how to be the kind of person people remembered after office hours. Didn't know what normal people did that resulted in having somewhere to be on New Year's Eve. So here she was. 9:47 p.m. on December 31st, sitting cross-legged on her IKEA couch in penguin pajamas, drinking wine that was still somehow disappointing, watching fictional people have the kind of life she'd convinced herself she didn't want anyway. Her phone lit up. Work text. Because of course it was. From him. Donald Trujillo. Happy New Year, Gladys. I hope you're enjoying your evening. She stared at the screen. Donald never texted her after hours unless something was on fire. Never made small talk. Never acknowledged that she existed outside the context of his calendar and his coffee preferences. This was strange. She typed back, "Thank you, Mr. Trujillo. Same to you." Professional. Appropriate. Revealing nothing. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Donald Trujillo. Big plans tonight? Gladys's chest tightened. He was making conversation. Actual, real, personal conversation with her on New Year's Eve. She should lie. Say she had a party, friends waiting, literally anything other than the truth. Instead, she typed, "Just a quiet night in." You? The dots took longer this time. Donald Trujillo, gala at the Metropolitan Club. 300 people I'd rather not speak to. Wearing a tuxedo I've worn to 6 of these things. Wishing I'd stayed home. Gladys blinked at her phone. That was more candid than 2 years of daily interaction had prepared her for. Donald Trujillo didn't do vulnerable. He did controlled, calculated, and untouchable. She typed, "That sounds miserable." Donald Trujillo, "It is. The champagne is offensively bad and a board member's wife keeps insisting I meet her niece who just got back from a year-long silent meditation retreat. Apparently, she's very grounded." The knock came at 11:53 p.m. Gladys had just refilled her wine glass and was seriously considering whether going to bed before midnight made her pathetic or practical when 3 sharp raps echoed through her studio apartment. Her first thought was that Mrs. Chen from 4B had locked herself out again. Her second thought, the one that made her stomach drop, was that no one knocked on her door at midnight on New Year's Eve unless something was very wrong. She padded to the door in her penguin pajamas, wine glass still in hand, and checked the peephole. Donald Trujillo stood in her hallway, in a tuxedo, looking like he'd walked directly out of the Metropolitan Club Gala and into her building without stopping to question the absolute insanity of what he was doing. Gladys froze. This wasn't happening. This was the wine. Or a stroke. Or some kind of elaborate prank that would end with her unemployment and a very expensive therapy bill. She opened the door. Mr. Trujillo. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Is everything all right? Did something happen? He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the penguins, the wine glass, the shock on her face. Then he stepped inside without being invited, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt impossibly loud in her tiny apartment. I left, he said simply. You left. The gala. I left the gala. Gladys's brain was working very hard to process this information and failing spectacularly. Donald Trujillo didn't leave galas. He stayed until the end, networked with precision, and made strategic exits that maximized his influence. He certainly didn't abandon 300 people to show up at his assistant's apartment in Queens. Why? It was the only word she could manage. He moved closer, and Gladys became acutely aware of how small her studio was, how there was nowhere to retreat, how he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the entire city that mattered. Because I spent the entire evening thinking about you alone in this apartment, Donald said, his voice low and rough in a way she'd never heard before. Because I've spent 2 years pretending I didn't notice you, and I'm done pretending. Outside, the city erupted. Fireworks, car horns, the distant roar of Times Square celebration filtering through her window. Midnight had arrived. I don't understand, Gladys whispered. Yes, you do. He reached for her wine glass, set it on the counter beside them, and cupped her face with both hands. You've always understood. You just didn't believe it. Then Donald Trujillo kissed her at midnight, and Gladys Jennett's entire life shattered into before and after. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a firing squad. Gladys stood outside the Trujillo Tower at 8:47 a.m., staring at the revolving doors like they might swallow her whole. She'd spent the entire weekend in a state of suspended disbelief, replaying Friday night in her mind until the memories felt more like fevered dreams than actual events. Donald had stayed until 3 a.m. They'd talked. He'd told her things that made her chest ache. Then he'd kissed her goodbye at her door and said, I'll see you Monday, like he hadn't just detonated her entire existence. Now it was Monday, and Gladys had no idea how to walk into that building and pretend to be his assistant when she could still feel his hands in her hair. She made it to the 32nd floor. Made it past the reception desk where Marissa was already gossiping with Chian about someone's engagement. Made it all the way to her desk outside Donald's office before the reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. She was dating her boss. Her obscenely powerful, borderline dangerous boss. The man who owned half of Manhattan and had the other half on speed dial. The man whose enemies didn't retire, they disappeared. This was a career-ending crisis wrapped in a felony waiting to happen. Donald's door opened. He stood there in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, looking at her with an expression that was pure possession. Good morning, Gladys. Good morning, Mr. Trujillo. Her voice sounded strangled. My office. Now. It wasn't a request. Gladys grabbed her tablet and followed him inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and Donald turned to face her. We need to talk about protocol, he said. Yes, we do. Gladys straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of professionalism she'd spent 2 years cultivating. This is inappropriate. I'm your employee. There are power dynamics and HR violations, and I'm aware. Then you understand why this can't continue. Donald moved closer, backing her against his desk with a kind of deliberate intent that made her breath catch. What I understand, he said quietly, is that I'm not letting you go. Not professionally. Not personally. So we're going to figure this out. How? Together. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You and me. We'll navigate this. But I need you to trust me. Outside the office, phones were ringing. Keyboards were clicking. The normal machinery of a Monday morning grinding forward while Gladys stood in Donald Trujillo's office, trying to remember how to breathe. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, Donald agreed. But you're still here. She was. And that was the most terrifying part of all. The Brooklyn brownstone looked like something out of a postcard, all ivy-covered brick and wrought iron railings, nestled on a tree-lined street that screamed old money and older traditions. Gladys stood on the sidewalk, staring at the front door like it might eat her alive. They're going to hate me, she said. Donald took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her in public, and the gesture felt both thrilling and terrifying. They're going to love you. You don't know that. I do. He squeezed her fingers. But I should warn you, they love hard. And loud. And with a lot of unsolicited opinions about everything. The door flew open before they reached it. A tiny woman in her 70s, barely 5 feet tall but radiating the kind of authority that made dictators nervous, stood in the doorway with a wooden spoon in one hand. Donaldo. She switched to rapid-fire Italian that Gladys couldn't follow, gesturing with the spoon in a way that seemed both affectionate and vaguely threatening. Then her sharp eyes landed on Gladys. And this is the girl? Nona Rosa, this is Gladys Jennett. Gladys, my grandmother. Gladys extended her hand. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Trujillo. Rosa ignored the hand, pulled Gladys into a crushing hug that smelled like garlic and expensive perfume, and then held her at arm's length for inspection. You're too skinny. Doesn't he feed you? Yes, I mean. Come. We eat. Rosa turned and marched back inside, the wooden spoon still wielded like a scepter. The house was chaos. 3 of Donald's cousins were arguing about soccer in the living room. His uncle Victor was screaming at someone on the phone in Spanish. A teenage girl Gladys didn't recognize was painting her nails on the dining room table, while an older woman, Donald's aunt, maybe, lectured her about proper behavior. Then they all stopped and looked at Gladys. Everyone, Donald said, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced ease. This is Gladys. She's with me. The room erupted. Questions came from every direction, overlapping and rapid fire. Where was she from? What did she do? How did they meet? Did she cook? Could she handle spicy food? Was she Catholic? Gladys felt like she was drowning until Rosa's wooden spoon came down on the table with a sharp crack that silenced everyone instantly. Basta. Rosa pointed the spoon at the assembled family. The girl just got here. Let her breathe. Then she turned to Gladys with a smile that was equal parts warmth and warning. Sit, Cara. You're family now. Whether you're ready or not. Gladys sat. And somewhere between the pasta course and the interrogation about her intentions, she realized that terrifying as this was, it felt like coming home. Rosa cornered Gladys in the kitchen while the men were arguing about politics and the younger cousins had migrated to the basement for what sounded like a very competitive card game. Help me with the espresso, Rosa said, which wasn't a request. Gladys followed her to the ancient stovetop espresso maker, watching as Rosa's practiced hands moved through the ritual with the kind of efficiency that came from 60 years of repetition. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rosa turned, fixing Gladys with those sharp dark eyes that saw entirely too much. My grandson loves you. It wasn't a question. Gladys felt her throat tighten. I love him too. Good. Rosa nodded once. Then we talk about what this means. Mrs. Trujillo. Rosa. You call me Nona Rosa like everyone else. She poured espresso into tiny cups with gold rims that probably cost more than Gladys's monthly rent. You have no family. The bluntness of it stole Gladys's breath. No, I don't. Parents? Dead. When I was 6. Other family? No one who wanted me. Rosa made a small noise in the back of her throat, something between sympathy and rage. She set down the espresso pot and took both of Gladys's hands in hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Listen to me, Cara. In this family, we don't do halfway. We don't do casual. You are with Donaldo, which means you are Trujillo now. You understand. Gladys's eyes burned. I'm not, we've only been. I don't care. Rosa's voice was firm but not unkind. You think I don't see how he looks at you? Like you hung the moon and painted the stars? That boy has been walking around like a ghost for 2 years, and now suddenly he's alive. That's you. You did that. Rosa, I'm nobody. I'm just his assistant. I don't come from anything. I don't have anything to offer. Stop. The wooden spoon appeared from Rosa's apron pocket like a weapon being drawn. You listen to me now. Family is not blood. Family is who shows up. Who stays. Who loves you even when you're being stupid. She pointed the spoon at Gladys for emphasis. You are family. I have decided this. The rest of them, they already decided this. So now you decide. Decide what? If you're ready to stop being alone. Gladys felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd kept carefully sealed since she was 6 years old and learned that people leave and don't come back. She looked at Rosa, this tiny, fierce woman who'd known her for 3 hours and had already decided she was worth keeping. I'm ready, Gladys whispered. Rosa pulled her into another crushing hug. Good. Now drink your espresso. Tomorrow I teach you Sunday gravy. You can't be Trujillo and not know how to make gravy. 3 months in, and Gladys still wasn't used to having someone waiting for her at the end of the day. Donald had started picking her up from work, which was absurd considering they worked in the same building and she was perfectly capable of getting home on her own. But he insisted, showing up at her desk at 6 p.m. with that look that said he'd been counting down the hours, and Gladys had stopped arguing because secretly, she'd been counting too. Tonight was different. He'd been strange all day, distracted in meetings, watching her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. When 6 p.m. came, he didn't take her to his car. He took her back to his office. Is something wrong? Gladys asked as he closed the door. No. Donald moved to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a small navy box that looked like it had been sitting there for a very long time. Something's right. Finally. Gladys's heart stopped. 3 months ago, you told me this was insane, Donald said, turning to face her. You were correct. Insane to think I could keep pretending I didn't notice you. Insane to think I could spend one more day without you knowing exactly how I feel. Donald, let me finish. He opened the box and Gladys forgot how to breathe. The ring was stunning, a perfect emerald-cut diamond that caught the light like it had been waiting its entire existence for this moment. 2 years ago, you came into my office for the first time. Week 3 of your employment. I'd made a decision you thought was reckless, and you told me exactly why I was wrong. You had a pen behind your ear and coffee on your sleeve, and you looked at me like I was just a man who'd made a bad call, not the man who terrified everyone else in this building. Gladys pressed her hand to her mouth. That day, I went to lunch with my lawyer. Walked past a jewelry store. Saw this ring. And I knew. Donald dropped to one knee, and Gladys felt tears spill over. I've been carrying this in my desk for 2 years, waiting for you to realize what I already knew. That you're it for me. That you've always been it. You bought me an engagement ring 2 years ago? Her voice cracked. I bought you an engagement ring the week I fell in love with you. I'm just finally in a position to give it to you. He held out the box. Marry me, Gladys. Make this official. Make this forever. She dropped to her knees in front of him, not caring that they were on his office floor, not caring that her mascara was probably running. Yes. God, yes. Donald slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd always known exactly what she needed. The dress had belonged to Donald's grandmother, then his mother, and now it was being pinned and tailored to fit Gladys in a bedroom that smelled like lavender and old photographs. Rosa stood behind her, making small adjustments to the 70-year-old silk while Gladys stared at herself in the mirror and tried to recognize the woman looking back. Stop fidgeting, Rosa said, her mouth full of pins. There are 250 people downstairs. There are 250 people who love you downstairs. Rosa secured the final pin and stepped back to admire her work. Besides, you think Donaldo would let anyone in that church who didn't love you? He vetted the guest list like it was a national security briefing. Gladys laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. 6 months ago, she'd been alone in a queen's apartment with a dying plant. Now she was standing in a Trujillo family heirloom, about to walk down the aisle of a cathedral in Brooklyn while a string quartet played and half of New York's power structure watched. "I'm terrified," she whispered. Rosa came around to face her, taking both her hands. "Good. Big things should be terrifying. That's how you know they matter." She squeezed Gladys's fingers. "But you listen to me, Kara. Today, you stop being the orphan. Today, you become the matriarch. You understand? This family, it's yours now. To protect. To lead. To love. I don't know how to be that. Neither did I." Rosa smiled, and for the first time, Gladys saw the weight of decades in her eyes. "But you learn. You show up every day and you love them, even when they're impossible. Especially when they're impossible." There was a knock at the door. Donald's cousin Marco poked his head in. "It's time." Rosa kissed both of Gladys's cheeks, straightened her veil, and handed her the bouquet of white roses that had been Donald's mother's favorite. "Go. Make my grandson the happiest man alive." The walk down the aisle felt like moving through a dream. 250 faces turned to watch her, but Gladys only saw one. Donald stood at the altar in a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of another era, and when their eyes met, he smiled like she was the only miracle he'd ever believed in. She reached him, and he took her hand. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," she whispered back. The priest began to speak, but Gladys barely heard the words. All she could think was that somewhere between a midnight knock and this September morning, she'd stopped being invisible. She'd stopped being alone. She'd become someone's forever. And when Donald said, "I do," Gladys finally believed she was worth keeping. They ended up back at Gladys's apartment that night, which seemed fitting somehow. The reception had been beautiful and loud and exactly what a Trujillo celebration should be, but when the last guest had left and the photographers had packed up their equipment, Donald had looked at her and said, "Take me home." So she had. The studio looked smaller now, cramped in a way it hadn't before, but it was still hers. Still the place where everything had changed. Donald loosened his bow tie and poured them both wine, the good kind now, because he'd quietly been restocking her kitchen for months, and they sat on her IKEA couch in their wedding clothes like two people who'd just survived something miraculous. "Winston's doing better," Gladys said, nodding toward the jade plant on the windowsill. He was. New leaves had started sprouting last month, small and green and impossibly stubborn. "You've been taking better care of him," Donald said. "I've been taking better care of everything." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of this man who'd chosen her over and over again. "Do you remember New Year's Eve?" "I remember every detail. I was sitting right here, in penguin pajamas, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life alone." Gladys looked around the apartment, at the places where Donald's presence had slowly infiltrated, his coffee mug on her counter, his jacket on her chair, his entire existence woven into the fabric of her small, careful world. "And then you knocked." Donald took her hand, running his thumb over the wedding band that now sat beside the emerald-cut diamond. "Best decision I ever made. Leaving a gala full of important people to show up at your secretary's apartment at midnight? Stopping pretending I didn't love you." He turned to face her fully. "I spent 2 years watching you, Gladys. Learning you. Waiting for the right moment. And then I realized there was no right moment. There was just you, alone, and me, pretending I was fine with that. So I stopped pretending." Gladys felt tears threatening again, which was absurd because she'd cried enough today to fill a reservoir. "I was so lonely." "I know. I thought I'd always be lonely." "You're not." Donald pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're never going to be lonely again. You're stuck with me. With Rosa. With the entire chaotic, overbearing, impossible Trujillo family who will show up unannounced and rearrange your furniture and have opinions about everything. Promise?" Her voice broke on the word. "Promise." Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime rhythm. Car horns and distant sirens and the rumble of the subway beneath the streets. But inside this small apartment in Queens, Gladys Janet Trujillo sat wrapped in her husband's arms and finally understood what it meant to belong. One midnight knock had changed everything, and she was never going back to invisible again.